Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss a survey that was conducted by the Middle East Scholar Barometer of Middle East experts, and it found that around 67% of respondents say that the foreign policy strategy was most likely to produce quote-unquote favorable results for the United States, that is, under President Biden, would be to return immediately to the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal, before negotiating other conditions with Iran. And of course, there are a host of other conditions that many parties want to add on, be it ballistic missiles, Iran's regional activities, etc. Nevertheless, these experts saying that let's enter the JCPOA, re-enter the JCPOA, I should say, first, and then, I imagine, tackle the other issues which there are grievances with Iran with. Only 4% of experts that were surveyed by the Middle East Scholar Barometer were in favor of continuing what Donald Trump termed the maximum pressure strategy on Iran. Let's put that now to our panelists who are joining us this morning from Washington, D.C. We're joined by Dr. Neda, who is a postdoctoral assistant professor at Rutgers University. Joining us from Arlington, Virginia is Yousof Azizi, who is a research analyst in U.S. foreign policy decision-making and a PhD candidate in public administration at Virginia Tech. Yousof and Neda, good morning to you both, and thank you for joining us. Neda, let me start with you. 67% is a fairly significant number of experts who would want the U.S. to rejoin the JCPOA without more conditions added on. I wonder, though, how realistic that really is, considering the various pressures both from allies and within the country that Biden is probably facing.
Well, as we've seen, it's not particularly realistic. It is based, I think, largely on historic law and what the United States has done in the past, and what scholars really think is the most efficient way to get moving forward with Iran. That you have to use the JCPOA as the foundation to actually address those bigger regional as well as great power competition issues that are out there. And so while the Biden administration is clearly showing that's not where it's going, scholars are really relying on what has historically been done as well as what's practically efficient in answering that. And then just on a slightly more methodological point here, in that survey, scholars weren't really given too many options, right? And so you're at an extreme of immediately rejoin or continue with the Trump administration. And so while there is solid reasoning for choosing immediately rejoining, the options in between are a little sparse.
That's a very good point. The polls are always, there's always something left that one leaves to be desired when it comes to such surveys. But Yousof, I wonder, there's obviously been movement in regards to the nuclear deal, right? Over the past 24 hours, we've had the U.S. express interest in joining talks with its European partners and possibly even Iran vis-a-vis the nuclear deal and efforts to try to save it. The Iranians, as you know, have given a deadline of the 21st, 22nd for movement on the issue of sanctions. In such a brief period of time, are the Iranians likely to get what they want?
So let me, before answering your question, I mentioned that in the same survey, as you described, 75% of the Middle Eastern scholars believe U.S. returning to the JCPOA make it less likely Iran gets a nuclear weapon in the next 10 years. So in answering your question, I would like to separate two issues. First, we have to look back when the Obama administration want to seek to have negotiation with Iran, engaging Iran in these issues. Because among all files and problems between Iran and the Western countries, especially United States, the Iran nuclear case had the capacity and capability to gather all members of the United Nations Security Council to address it. I mean that to make sure that Iran never, ever goes to get a nuclear bomb. Russia and China are on the same page as Europeans and Americans. So we cannot find any other files, any other issues against Iran that encourages international cooperation, especially among the members of the United Nations Security Council. So addressing Iran's nuclear program became a priority for the U.S. and its allies in Europe and even in the region. So I can also add that Iranians themselves want to peacefully address this crisis if the rights to have a civilian nuclear program preserved. So if we think of this atmosphere that all peoples want to peacefully in doing addressing the Iran nuclear program in a diplomatic manner, so it could be the first step to broaden the negotiation with Iran over other issues in the regions, regional security and other other mutual concerns.
Right.
So because of that, I think that these scholars believe that, okay, rejoining as soon as possible with Iran to the JCPOA and encouraging Iran to address other issues would be the best option for the United States.
But Neda, there is this huge domestic reality, right, on the ground in Iran, where the economy is not doing very well as we speak, certainly, and that obviously adds significant pressure upon the Rouhani administration, which is on its way out fairly soon this year. But nevertheless, I mean, that window is also closing, right, where if Rouhani were to leave office, we don't know who will come in next as the president of Iran and how willing he would be as president to really renegotiate, if that is what's required or desired by the Western countries, or even just get back into the JCPOA as the rest of the parties would want. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there are at least two or three things that we have to sort of speak about in addressing that question. One is what came out yesterday is not a substantive change in terms of what the Iranians were expecting. For the United States to say that it's open to and will return to possible negotiations is not the tangible step that Iran wanted to see ahead of that February 21st deadline. And so what the response is, I think the Iranians are clearly looking for a Jim Baker here, not they're not looking to prolong the discussions or a re-entry into the JCPOA. They're looking to get down to doing the actual work that's entailed in diplomacy and negotiations. In terms of the Rouhani administration, that is part of why maybe the Biden administration is somewhat hesitant, in addition to all of the lobbying that's going on and the larger regional concerns about the JCPOA. And so the question that is being asked is, well, even if we work with the administration, the Rouhani administration that brought us the JCPOA, these are the known bureaucrats on the Iranian side, what does it mean after June? And what they really mean is August, because the Iranian president won't be seated until August. And so here's the thing that you have to remember is that none of these things happen without Khamenei's approval and explicit direction. And so he has already said that returning to the JCPOA is the ultimate goal, right? And in essence, that's his declaration on it. So this hesitation over do we return in the sense of we don't know who we're going to be dealing with in 6 months, you actually may want to, in fact, get Iran back into the JCPOA. The United States wants to return to compliance because you will want to have already set the table when a new administration comes in. Right. And so between having returned to the JCPOA and having this direction from the supreme leader, then that actually kind of corners what will probably be a right of center Iranian president. As we've seen with the Iranian parliament already, the populace has started moving towards the conservatives and the right side. So not returning to the JCPOA, the United States is actually giving leverage to the conservatives and the right in Iran. And for people who have not been in Iran or in the Middle East, let's be clear, there is a difference between the center and the reformists and the right. Yep. On the ground, there are very practical differences. So for people out there who want to say there's not a difference, there is. And so the Biden administration not working to come into compliance or further compliance with the JCPOA is actually helping the right in Iran, and that will impact the Iranian presidential elections. And then in addition to that, it's an additional 6 months in which Iran will be advancing its nuclear program, August. So
Neda, I do apologize. I'm going to cut you off. I do sincerely apologize. We're just quickly running out of time. Yousof, we just have about a minute left. Tell me about your view on the domestic Iranian politics and how that will affect everything going forward.
First of all, under the JCPOA, the structure of UN sanction and unilateral U.S. sanction did not disappear. So the three-year mechanism, the snapback mechanism, and U.S. hegemony were practically granting that the U.S. could immediately impose the same sanction structure before 2013 on Iran. So, but Iran did not have any guarantee, So after what Trump did to this agreement, it is logical to say that who has to fully come back to its obligation first under the negotiation. So Iranian wants to have, to release all its frozen assets outside Iran. They want to have connected to international financial system. They want to sell their oil freely without any restriction. So if all of these preserve, I think any faction, Rouhani or other, or a so-called hardliner, anyone wants to rejoin to JCPOA as soon as possible. So there is no difference between Iranians, but all of them want to see that the Western country, the other side of the deal, they do their obligation, that Iranian also will do their obligation.
Very well.
I don't agree that the domestic politics of Iran would heavily affect the international negotiation that Iranian do. As you said, that there is some hierarchy under the Iranian negotiation team, the Supreme National Security Council under the Supreme Leaders. So it is very different from the American domestic politics who affect the international negotiation.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that, but we sincerely appreciate both Yousof and Neda for their time this morning and for shedding light for myself and our viewers about where possibly, again, we may head when it comes to efforts for the United States to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal and possibly even in the Iranian eyes lift the sanctions that, again, arguably were never really lifted. If we're talking about banking sanctions more specifically, will Middle East experts get their wish for the U.S. to re-enter the JCPOA without adding conditions about other concerns that the U.S. and other parties have vis-a-vis Iran's activities beyond, of course, the nuclear energy program? That, again, is a wait-and-see game. The meeting will be taking place very soon, at least between the European powers. The U.S. has said it may very well join that meeting as well. So we will wait and see and keep a close eye on how those developments play out. The 21st, 22nd deadline that Iran has placed is coming up very soon. So really it is a ticking time clock. Right? It's the alarm clock is about to go off very, very soon on that, at least in the Iranians' eyes, unless there's an extension that satisfies them. I'll leave it there for now. I'll be back with my final segment after this break.